Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler. In the world of watch journalism, whether in video form on YouTube or as written text, attention tends to gravitate towards the most desirable or at least currently appreciated models. This leaves an awful lot of interesting, appealing and potentially more accessible watches for the more original few. Today I'd like to take a look at some of these very watches which, as seemingly peripheral additions to the ranges of their respective brands, deserve a second look. Importantly, I'm not necessarily looking for the most unusual choices from the major brands, but rather those pieces which we overlook because they are too common, not iconic, or simply wouldn't normally be considered. The more regular viewers will know that I covered this theme about a year ago, yet with market and collection changes, I think it's worth revisiting this subject. Where brands chosen for this video are concerned, I've chosen the following contenders because they, realistically, represent the centre of a Venn diagram of watches considered by watch enthusiasts, considered by those less expressly interested, and which actually sell in large numbers from high street shops. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get straight into the first watch from the biggest name in the business. As I've said, let's begin with, quite simply, the biggest name in the watch industry, Rolex. Rolex, since its relatively recent inception in watchmaking terms in 1905, has put business before watchmaking in absolute terms. This certainly doesn't detract from the quality of their watches, or indeed their iconic status, but it does mean they're a very different brand to look at. Beyond all doubt, the case of a Rolex Oyster is perhaps the most iconic design in the watch world. However, there is a considerable premium for such a case. With the recent rise in the popularity of the sports watch, the Rolex Submariner, GMT Master 2, Sea Dweller, Explorer and Daytona are essentially off limits to most buyers. Other models are appealing but in need of a movement refresh, such as the Explorer 2, Milgauss and Air King, whilst some formerly unpopular models are now seriously desirable, such as the new Oyster Perpetual and Sky Dweller. Nevertheless, with the exception of the massively unpopular Cellini, incidentally my favourite Rolex, the watch you would least expect in this video is the Datejust, and that's just why it is. Think about it. The Rolex Datejust is, as a general rule, the go-to Rolex. It's robust enough to take a great deal of everyday abuse, as well as making an everyday companion thanks to its steel case, 100-metre water resistance, and of course the date. In fact, whether you choose the 36 or 41mm version, you'll receive the new in-house 3235 movement with its 70-hour power reserve, revised lubrication, balanced bridge, lightweight escapement, and an altogether new level of finishing. Rather ironically, this watch's overly popular and perhaps even mundane image is a consequence of its own success. This watch pioneered the display of only the date on the dial in 1945. And that in a nutshell is just why this is the ultimate underrated Rolex. It's the perfect Rolex. For most people, whether on the beach, on skis, at a business meeting, or enjoying a fine meal, the Datejust with its new movement and classic appearance might be the most ironically underrated Rolex and perfect for the occasion. If you want to be original, go for one with a more exotic dial, or, if you're really feeling bold, put a steel variant on a regimental NATO strap for a classic military feel. Now, if Rolex was going to be mentioned in this video, Omega certainly had to as well. Omega as a brand, at least in my opinion, goes far beyond Breitling or IWC simply due to their history, innovation and the name which they've sustained, with a few dips one has to admit, for over 70 years. In recent years their portfolio has been one of the most exciting ones, with the new Seamaster, Speedmaster and even Constellation models. Amongst these, there are some real corkers like the wonderfully versatile Seamaster Aquaterra, the iconic Seamaster 300M, and the Speedmaster Professional, all of which have received timely updates. In fact, even the DeVille collection is starting to be appreciated as a delightful dress watch. Nevertheless, there is one model which makes more and more sense in light of rising prices for their more iconic models, the 2014 Speedmaster Mark II. Released to revive the intended successor to the Speedmaster Professional from 1969, whilst also being a more affordable alternative to the Moonwatch and its high-tech coaxial siblings, the Mark II has, to my eye, more to give than either of them. Housed in a beautiful 70s-style tonneau case, this gives the traditional tri-compact layout with the date placed at 6 o'clock. Furthermore, 100-metre water resistance and an automatic movement make it stand out as a much tougher watch than the manual Speedmaster Pro. Speaking of the movement, this is a curious and unexplored direction Omega didn't end up going with more watches, an ETA-based coaxial column wheel operated movement. This provides a balance of high-end watchmaking with ease of servicing. The new Speedmaster Professional, priced £1,300 higher than the Mark II and nearly twice its used price, has now gained a truly in-house coaxial movement. However, it still doesn't have the column wheel which so many buyers would want, and which does feature on the Mark II, along with that higher water resistance. Altogether, as a watch which will likely be discontinued by Omega relatively soon due to the age of its movement, I think the Mark II is remarkably underrated. Before we continue, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to catch all the latest from Watch Chronicler on YouTube. Remember that to catch all our articles and podcasts, you can head over to watchchronicler.com, which features everything including the bulk of our written and audio content. Also, head over to our Instagram page to catch all the latest updates about new watches and stories in our articles, podcasts, and of course videos. Whenever luxury watches are discussed of late, Tudor is very much an established member of the club. Previously known for offering Rolex-made, ETA-powered watches as a more affordable alternative to the Coronet, Tudor is now known for a separate range entirely, but one which is very much rooted in the usual places, and needless to say still produced under the Rolex umbrella. The Black Bay and Pelagos show the brand's diving heritage, whilst the various dress watches offered fit a more aesthetic market. In this range, however, there are inevitably places which don't see much attention, yet which offer an awful lot. A key contender is the North Flag, the brand's adventure watch, and the first with an in-house movement. Unfortunately, these have proven unpopular with owners, perhaps due to the abnormal shape of the strap. The true gem, in my opinion, is one which Tudor has quietly kept updated, and which might be the ideal gentleman's watch. In a funny sort of way, the Tudor Heritage Advisor might be the best expression of what the brand can do. This 42mm watch initially seems quite the sports watch, with a titanium mid-case to give lightness, and a steel bezel and caseback for durability, whilst 100-metre water resistance keeps it operating through any daily trial. Nevertheless, its dial is that of a dress watch, with Dauphine hands and a very 60s aesthetic when displaying the time, date, alarm, and alarm power reserve. So it's a tough, manly and handsome watch which will keep you on time with its alarm, a feature which stops dead rather than fading away like most others. The only downside is a movement based on the ETA 2892 with an alarm module rather than in-house movement. This will of course disappoint some enthusiasts, yet it'll also make an inherently complex watch much more manageable to service if, in the dim and distant future, Tudor stops supplying parts. Certainly this isn't a cheap watch, but it's also a uniquely capable and a rather undiscovered one. Keeping to widely accepted luxury brands, I was going to move to Breitling or perhaps IWC, but despite my enjoyment of their watches, and the fact they do make no mistake, undesirable watches for their collection, none showed a level of value, individuality, or potential to impress equal to the watch which I've chosen. This is a watch from the standard bearer for Japanese watchmaking, and a luxury brand with a seemingly limitless level of potential for collector market growth, Grand Seiko. The Grand Seiko portfolio has plenty of exciting and well-loved pieces, ranging from the cutting-edge SBGA 211 spring drive Snowflake in titanium to the classical, steel, and rather conservative SBGM 221, my own beloved GMT dress watch. A watch which, however, hasn't received the same love is the awkward-looking but masterful spring drive GMT Chronograph, a watch virtually unmatched when compared to alternatives. Conceived in hand-polished steel with a 43.5mm size, this is no small watch, but an ergonomic triumph of gleaming metal on the wrist. Nevertheless, its oversized pushers and wide lugs do tend to overwhelm the uninitiated. It is, though, unmistakably as good quality as you could pray for at this price point. The dial, depending upon the particular version, is remarkably legible with its subdials arranged logically, but unusually, with the chronograph and date on the right, and power reserve indicator and small seconds on the left. A detail difficult to miss is the retention of beautiful quality hands and markers, which on such a busy dial bring a sense of simple luxury. Going beyond the uniquely Japanese dial, one which, like some allusion to a geisha of old, is at once beautiful and a tad unsettling for a foreigner, the 50-jewel 9R86 movement is the star. For a luxury chronograph, it has perfect finishing, automatic winding, a long 3-day power reserve, as well as a column wheel and vertical clutch for absolute precision in operating the chronograph and keeping constant timekeeping with it engaged. On the other side, it also uses Grand Seiko's spring drive, an electromagnetically powered brake, which, by powering a quartz oscillator on a separate circuit, operates as an escapement for the automatic movement. In essence, this quartz regulation slows the spring's unwinding to a perfect speed, thus giving absolutely smooth seconds. For a chronograph, particularly one which can be found for around £6,000 new, this is beyond remarkable. Founded around the same time as Rolex, Oris is a very proud independent Swiss brand which deserves a place in this video as one of the most popular mid-priced options on the high street. It's certainly fair to say that Oris has some superbly successful and lucrative watches in its range, such as the Divers 65, Aquis and Big Crown. However, one watch which is usually left out, to my eye, is a missed opportunity for many buyers, and this is the BC3. This very technical piece is perhaps the best modern interpretation of some of the tool watches used in aviation and field applications during the 20th century. Originally launched in some form in 1999, it's one of the oldest collections in the Oris catalogue, but also one which introduced many of the most recognisable Oris cues where styling is concerned. Crucially, it's one of the last Oris watches with an old-fashioned price tag too. When I bought my previous generation Aquis about 5 years ago, I paid just under £1,000. Now the price will be £1,600, whilst the BC3 remains a £950 piece. Not only does it share the Aquis's automatic Swiss Solita movement, but also a less cumbersome version of the screwed crown guards and threaded crown of that dive watch to give 100-metre water resistance. The case, complete with short, comfortable lugs and a brushed finish, is perfect for pretty much any sporting activity you could throw at it. The dial, available in an assortment of more or less legible configurations in conjunction with a day-date complication, generally features large Arabic numerals, and the hands are delightfully luminous and painted. Of course, this isn't the most extravagant watch in the world, but with quality, versatility and a good price, it could be the most underrated Oris. It also steps away from dress watches, an area where, in my opinion, Oris just can't produce quality quite like Longines. Speaking of Longines' ability to produce a cracking watch, it is with this brand that I'd like to conclude the video as, whilst all pay attention to such models as Longines' heritage chronographs, dive watches and aviation pieces, very little attention is given to what might be my favourite collection, the 1832. Named after the brand's year of establishment, this is the epitome of an elegant, mid-century dress watch without any of the faux vintage cues which, whilst charming, risk premature aging of other Longines models. These pieces, available in a 30mm woman's size and a 40mm men's size, offer either a cream or black dial with drops of metal for markers and sharply cut beton markers for the hours. Paired with Dauphine hands, this is a design which will always look good but still keeps a classic Mad Men sort of feel. In addition, the sharp and well-made case houses a movement based on the high-end ETA 2892 but with a longer 64-hour power reserve due to a slower beat rate and excellent decoration. Importantly, this versatile movement can offer you the time and the date, the time, date and moon phase, or, staggeringly for this price, the time and an annual calendar accounting for the different lengths of months. Only the strange month of February will require adjustment. Priced the way it is, it's clear that this watch deserves more attention than it receives, if only because it's about as good a watch as you could realistically ever need. Anyway, I'll conclude the video there, but let me know what you thought of these choices in the comment section below, and let me know what you would have chosen. Thank you very much for watching. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com, out.